His paintings and drawings of the members of the Tudor court are recognised the world over, and in some cases even helped to shape history. Everyone from Henry VIII to Jane Seymour to Anne of Cleves sat for him, and his images possess a lifelike quality that has made these people more real to us than any document ever could. I'm speaking, of course, about the famed artist Hans Holbein the Younger, and in today's much requested art history documentary, I'm going to tell you about his extraordinary life, show you many of his beautiful works, and reveal some incredible behind-the-scenes details about how he created his paintings, which I didn't even know until I saw his original preparatory sketches up close and was able to photograph them. Just before we get going, I wanted to remind you that my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, is now available for pre-order from Amazon as an ebook. There's a link in the description box below, and will shortly be released as both an ebook and a paperback. It's a directory of hundreds of websites which provides certificates, transcripts, photographs, and other information that can help you build out your Irish family tree, learn your family stories so that your ancestors feel like three-dimensional people, and feel better connected to your past. The websites are graded on a simple star system to tell you which ones are the best, and the book will also share with you which ones are free, and many are, plus provide tips on how best to use them. So whether you're a seasoned genealogist or you just want a new hobby, if you have Irish ancestry, I urge you to check this out. Hans Holbein the Younger was born in Augsburg in Germany in 1497 or 1498 to Hans Holbein the Elder and his wife Anna Mayer. The elder Holbein was an artist known for his religious works, such as the one you see here, as was his other son Ambrosius, who had been born in about 1494. Creating images was therefore the family business, and we might say that paint flowed through Hans the Younger's veins rather than blood. We know next to nothing about the boy's youth, though we do have this picture of the brothers, created by their father in 1511. He obviously trained as an artist though, and it's not much of a leap to say he must have worked in his father's studio. By the year 1515, both the Holbein boys, or rather young men as they were by then, had moved to Basel in Switzerland, where they continued to ply their trade as artists. We know they were there by that year, as a copy of the book Praise of Folly by famed scholar Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam survives, which had marginal illustrations by both men. The book belonged to a schoolmaster called Oswald Geshusler, aka Myconius, and was their first commission. They also created this sign for him in 1516, with Hans painting one side of it and Ambrosius the other. Hans painted the men at the table. It is during this time that we also begin to see the portraits that Holbein the Younger would become so famous for. The first of these was a 1516 double portrait of the mayor of the town, Jacob Mayer zum Hassen, and his wife Dorothea. He next travelled elsewhere in Switzerland, working with his father in Lucerne on the decoration of the house of the chief magistrate there, a merchant called Jacob von Hertenstein, and painting Jacob's son Benedict, as you see here. The inscription on the work reads, "When I looked like this, I was 22 years old," and Holbein has dated it and signed it with his initials, H.H. Sadly, this young man died just 5 years later. By the end of September 1517, Hans was back in Basel, where he was admitted to its Painters' Guild. Ambrosius Holbein had also been admitted to its Guild of Heaven in 1517 and gained citizenship in 1518, but he died in about 1519, at least that's when records of him cease, the year before Hans gained his own Basel citizenship. Around the same time, Hans also married a widow named Elspeth Schmidt. They would have 3 children together called Philip, Catherine and Jacob, the older 2 of whom you see here with their mother. As for Hans Holbein the Elder, he died in 1524, and I'm afraid I don't know what happened to his wife Anna. Hans Holbein the Younger would stay in Basel until 1526 and create many other works of art during his residency. Not all have survived, and it is a great pity we will never be able to see for ourselves the interior decor he created for the House of Hans zum Tanz, or the classical and religious imagery he painted in the town hall in the early 1520s, and again in 1530 when he finally got around to painting the third wall he'd been hired to do. We do have some of his works from this period though. There is the excruciatingly realistic 1522 painting of the deceased Jesus Christ, or at least it's a realistic depiction of a corpse. I'm not saying Jesus actually looked like this. And this portrait he created of Erasmus, which is one of 3 he painted of this man. And gosh, what's that Erasmus is writing? It's almost like he could see the future and had excellent taste in YouTube videos. Although the Tudor nerds amongst us might remember him best for his portraits of members of that royal family and its court, in fact, a great number of Holbein's works follow biblical or classical themes, as you can see from these examples, which include his version of the Last Supper. He was also incredibly diverse, doing far more than just painting. He created designs for stained glass windows, woodcuts, and even book covers, as you can see from these examples. Later in the video, I'll also share with you some of his ideas for jewellery and other objects, including items he envisioned for Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and Henry VIII. Unfortunately for Holbein, the mid to late 1520s were not a great time to be creating religious imagery in some parts of Europe, for the Reformation was gaining traction and such items became less and less popular as Lutheran ideas, which would eventually morph into what we would now call Protestantism, took hold. He may have already tried travelling to Milan and France during the first half of that decade, we're not really sure, but by late 1526 he decided to try his luck in England, where the Reformation had not yet spread. He travelled via Antwerp and carried with him a letter of introduction from Erasmus to a Peter Gillis, who lived there, in which the scholar told his friend that the arts in Basel were frozen and that Holbein was going to England to try to scrape together some money. Once again, Hans relied on Erasmus's connections to get a head start and was taken into the home of one of his correspondents upon arrival, who just so happened to be the famed Thomas More. More wrote to his old friend that December that, "Your painter is a wonderful artist, but I fear he will not find England as fruitful and profitable as he hopes. However, I shall do my best to ensure that he does not find it quite so unfruitful." More was as good as his word and better, for Holbein was in fact successful and quickly too. In May 1527, Henry VIII had a banqueting house built at his Palace of Greenwich, in which 2 triumphal arches were included, and a payment of £4 10 was made to Master Hans for the painting of the Plate of Terouanne. This is a scene showing the defeat of the French in battle, which standeth on the back side of the Great Arch. This would seem to be Hans Holbein, and he was also hired to complete a ceiling picture of the heavens. No doubt with More's help, and that of another Erasmus connection, Sir Henry Guilford, Holbein secured a number of lucrative aristocratic commissions, some of which we can see here. One of my personal favourites from this time is Holbein's painting of More's family, dating to 1527. The original was unfortunately lost to fire in the 18th century, but we have a number of copies, including this one in the National Portrait Gallery in London. It's huge and displayed behind glass, so you'll have to excuse the reflections you can see in my photograph of it, which show the painting on the wall opposite it. There was simply no way for me to entirely avoid these. I think you can still tell what an impressive feat it is, though. Holbein's technique was to make drawings of his subjects first, which would then be used to create the final paintings. Here are some examples of drawings with the final portraits beside them, for instance. Not all drawings became paintings, perhaps the potential clients changed their minds. Not all were labelled, and those that were often labelled later on and incorrectly. This, and the fact that later writers have become confused over what certain Tudor figures' names and titles were at a given point, has led to a number of misidentifications. This, for instance, is not Mother Jack, nursemaid to Edward VI. She is in fact Margaret Giggs, a member of Thomas More's extended family, and you can see her again in the final More family portrait. This image is often touted, even in TV documentaries featuring supposedly reputable historians, as being Jane Parker Boleyn, sister-in-law of Anne Boleyn, but it is most definitely not her. Furthermore, there is no reason to think that these 2 portraits show Anne's father and brother either, and this one of a blonde woman in a nightcap is on very shaky ground indeed when it is called Anne Boleyn, no matter what the 18th century label on it says. I have videos on the supposed Boleyn pictures already, and all are linked below for you. The preparatory drawings could also have additional information to remind the artist about colours, textures or decorative elements which he wanted to include in the final painting, as we see in this image of William Parr, Marquess of Northampton, and brother to Henry VIII's final wife, Catherine Parr. Before we move on to the next remarkable aspect of Holbein's technique, to support the channel and stay up to date with all my latest episodes, make sure to tap those like and subscribe buttons and switch on the notification bell. You can also become a member of my YouTube community by hitting the join button below videos or on my channel homepage, and then following the on-screen instructions. For more bonus material from History Calling, you can find me on Patreon, Instagram and my Amazon storefront. And if you sign up to my free newsletter on my website, historycallingofficial.com, you'll get a complimentary guide giving you 5 quick and easy tips for recognising good history books and bad. All the links you'll need are below for you. Another feature of Holbein's modus operandi may be seen most clearly in this 1527 preparatory drawing of Thomas More, and it is the use of pinprick holes in drawings through which chalk dust could be rubbed onto another sheet to create an outline. The holes aren't obvious from this front shot of the drawing, but if I show you the reverse side, hopefully you can see them. If you're still struggling, here's a close-up of one portion of it, and of course you can always pause the video for a better look. Holbein is also credited with designing the decorations seen on this 1527 suit of armour, which was made in Greenwich and was most likely created for Henry VIII. The decor is rather worn now, but we can still make out much of it by zooming in. The trip to London had been a success and made Holbein enough money that when he returned to Basel in mid-1528, he was able to buy a house, followed by the house next door in March 1531. The Reformation was really beginning to bite there though when it came to art, and as religious works were denounced as idolatrous and destroyed, it became harder to get commissions. In late 1531, Holbein therefore left his family, again in the city, and returned to England. He even converted to the burgeoning Protestant religion. His willingness to go with the flow on religious matters was certainly advantageous, given Henry VIII's ongoing problems with Rome at the time, as the Pope refused to annul the king's marriage to Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. This led to an effectual split from the Holy See in 1533, which was solidified by later legislation and the king's excommunication in 1538. Under normal circumstances, a citizen of Basel was not allowed to be absent from the city for more than 2 years. Note that Holbein had respected that rule in the 1520s and gone back even before the allotted time had been spent in England, nor could they work for any foreign prince. But by this point, Holbein was so well regarded that the rules were bent for him. He was allowed to work for Henry VIII, and though he did make some trips back home, including in 1538, he was allowed to remain based in England without forfeiting his citizenship. This was particularly helpful, no doubt, as Holbein was a bad boy when it came to how he treated his wife. His will would later show that he had 2 children in England and was possibly supporting their mother too, while his legitimate family stayed in Switzerland and were barely ever seen by him. This second stint in England was the period of his life for which I think he is best known, as he created some of the most iconic images of the family and court of King Henry. It was a while, however, before he started painting the royals, and instead, between 1532 and 1536, we find him undertaking other commissions. These included a portrait entitled Hans of Antwerp in 1532, the designing of a table fountain for Anne Boleyn so that she could give it to Henry VIII as a New Year's gift at the end of 1532, and this famous portrait of Thomas Cromwell, another of Henry's favoured ministers, which dates to 1532-33, when Cromwell was master of the Jewel Office. Incidentally, the book you see on the desk next to him was located recently and can be seen here on show in Hever Castle. There was also a painting of a statue of Adam and Eve in 1533-4, possibly as a decoration for the cradle of the future Elizabeth I, because Holbein's payment for it appears next to a payment for her crib in the royal accounts, and jewellery designs for Anne. The ones you see here are monograms of the initials H and A for Henry and Anne, as, contrary to popular belief, it wasn't just a B pendant that Anne wore. She did have other letter jewellery. Hans also worked for a group of German merchants known as the Hanseatic League, who operated next to the River Thames, and we see one of the so-called steelyard portraits he created for them here, helpfully dated to 1532. These merchants were so happy with his work that they had him create 2 paintings for their assembly room, and may also have had him design a pageant to celebrate the coronation of Anne Boleyn in June 1533, though whether his picture of the pageant is a design of his own making or just a record of what it looked like is debated. It was also in 1533 that he created one of his most famous and popular works, The Ambassadors, which shows the then French ambassador to England, Jean de Dinterville, on the left, and Bishop George de Selve on the right, who was then visiting de Dinterville. Hans may have hoped that when the ambassador took the picture back to France, the French king, Francois I, would see it and hire him, but as it happened, he never did get the opportunity to admire it, and Holbein remained in London. It was only with the execution of Anne and the arrival of Jane Seymour as queen that we can be sure that Hans was now painting for the royals. He is referred to in a letter of 1536 as the king's painter, and later records show his salary was a very respectable £30 per annum. From here on out, the most famous Tudor portraits came thick and fast. We have this image of the new queen from that year, or perhaps 1537, and it exists in multiple versions and sometimes shows her wearing the Tudor consort necklace. I have a whole video on that necklace which I'll leave linked for you. I suspect that the necklace is a later addition to the final portrait though, as the preparatory sketch does not show her wearing all of it. She's wearing the pendant but not the matching chain of rubies and gold alternating with clusters of 4 pearls. Holbein also designed this cup for Jane during her brief time as queen and painted the lost Whitehall mural, so named because it was in Whitehall Palace. It dated to 1537 as well and showed Henry, his wife and his parents. Sadly, it was destroyed by fire in 1698, but it survives in copies and also in this partial drawing showing the figures of Henry VIII and his father Henry VII, which is now in the National Portrait Gallery in London, and which I think gives you an idea of how large the original portrait must have been. Then there is this solo portrait of Henry made in around 1537, which has defined his image for many people in the century since. We have this beautiful image of Jane's son, the future Edward VI, which probably dates to 1539 and was the New Year's gift given to the king by Holbein at the end of that year. I've always loved this one for the very vibrant colour of his outfit and the details on the gold embroidery. The preparatory sketch for Edward is quite basic though, which makes me think that it was a struggle to get the baby prince to stay still long enough to be drawn. There is another drawing labelled later as being the king's older daughter, Princess Mary, later Mary I, but there is nothing for little Princess Elizabeth, who was the least important Tudor around in the late 1530s, given her mother's fall from grace and death. Holbein also created a number of beautiful miniature portraits during his second sojourn in England, many of which still survive, and which are remarkable for the level of detail he was able to invest them with, despite their tiny size. My personal favourite is this one, which is likely to be of Henry's 5th queen, Catherine Howard, and shows her wearing the same Tudor consort necklace we saw around Jane Seymour's neck. There is a very unconvincing theory that it shows wife number 4, Anne of Cleves, and you guessed it, I have videos all about Catherine and Anne's portraiture, which I'll link below for you. I've jumped ahead a little bit by getting to Anne and Catherine though, so let's just backtrack a moment to Jane Seymour, who had died after giving birth to Edward in October 1537. It was this event which would be the cause of yet more commissions from Henry VIII, as the king dispatched his trusted painter around Europe to take the likenesses of a number of princesses that he was considering making his 4th wife. Having sent Holbein to Brussels in March 1538, Henry was particularly taken with the picture brought back to him of the 16-year-old widow Christina of Denmark, Duchess of Milan. Holbein had 3 hours with the Duchess, and the now lost drawing he created of her will have been used to make the final portrait you see here. That marriage did not proceed, of course, but you can see my video on Christina's life to hear what happened to her after she escaped Henry VIII. Next, it was on to paint Louise von Guise in Joinville and Anna of Lorraine in Nancy. Those images do not survive. Then another 3 women in Burgundy, and the stop-off in Basel I already mentioned to check in on his family. In 1539, he was dispatched to the Duchy of Cleves to capture the likenesses of the reigning duke's 2 sisters, Anne and Amalia, and on the 11th of August, one of Henry's ambassadors in Cleves, Nicholas Wotton, wrote to the king that "Your Grace's servant, Hans Holbein, hath taken the effigies of my Lady Anne and the Lady Amalie," meaning Amalia, "and hath expressed their images very lively." When Henry saw Anne's picture, he believed he was on to a winner, and the marriage took place in January 1540. Unfortunately, he took an immediate dislike to his new wife, however, and annulled their union that July to marry her lady-in-waiting, Catherine Howard. Cromwell, who had helped to arrange the Cleves match, was beheaded for his trouble, but Holbein escaped, and it is worth noting that Henry never actually said that the portrait of Anne misrepresented her face, nor did he criticise her looks, instead focusing on her body. Presumably, had Holbein badly misconstrued her appearance, he would have paid a much higher price. But as it was, all that seems to have happened is that the royal commissions more or less dried up, barring the miniature, which is probably Catherine Howard, and this drawing of Prince Edward, which looks as though it could date to the start of the 1540s. By this time, the artist was apparently financially secure anyway. During his trip back to Basel in the autumn of 1538, he had signed a contract with the authorities there, by which they agreed to give him a salary of 50 guilders for life, and to take care of his family during his absence with a stipend of 40 guilders per year. He was given 2 years to bring his affairs in England to completion, after which he was to return home, but he would be allowed to continue to work for foreign princes and to export his works abroad for sale. As it happened, though, for reasons unknown, Holbein never did return to Basel. He was back in England by October 1538, and barring the trip to Cleves, he stayed there. We know he had his second family in the country, so perhaps that was a factor, but we'll likely never understand his full motivations. In 1541, he was recorded as living in the parish of St Andrew Undershaft in Aldgate Ward in London, and he took on denizen status that same year, meaning that he was allowed certain additional citizenship rights despite being a foreigner. He painted this self-portrait in which he gives his age as 45 in the final year or so of his life, and died in the city in November 1543, most likely of plague. Despite all the money he must have made over the years, he had debts of £6 13 and no assets listed. Holbein's reputation for incredibly lifelike pictures and portraits has long outlived him, securing for him a place in the annals of history which he could surely only have dreamed of in life. He's even made an appearance in the musical Six, which is about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, by way of the bonkers but fun song Haus of Holbein. Such was the number of his creations that, even despite the fact that many have not survived to us, I have only been able to show you a small selection of what does still exist here, and I certainly urge you to Google his works to take a look at some of the others. If you click my art history playlist, you'll find nearly all the other videos I mentioned in this one so that you can learn more about his paintings and subjects. Do let me know in the comments which of his pictures is your favourite. I'll actually be listing my top 5 for my upper level patrons this week. And until next time, keep learning.